Hi everybody, I'm here to talk about the narrow view of CSR, which was basically made popular by Milton Friedman. Actually, the article he wrote, which went by the title of his main idea, right, the social responsibility of business is to increase profits. So, it was written in 1970 and it came out uh, in the New York Times. It was really popular at that time because it challenged the whole idea of what CSR was. Right? Actually, it was not a whole new idea because it was somewhat emanating from the wider view of CSR. So, in order for us to really understand what CSR, narrow view of CSR is, it might be useful to find out what it's not, or the broader view of CSR. So let's do that. Okay, so the broad view basically is CSR, as it says here. It's corporate social responsibility. The most well-known proponents of this was that there's actually two people here who are really famous for the debate. It's Edward Freeman for broad view and Milton Friedman for narrow view. So Edward Freeman was popular for the broad view, which is corporate CSR, or basically corporate social responsibility. He made it popular, right, because his idea was that it was possible for all stakeholders to play a part in CSR, right? So he was saying that it could come to a point where it's not only the business that's profiting or benefiting, but it's also the consumers themselves. It was like there was like a common ground where everybody can actually be benefiting from the business. So it was popular, and it had many other terms, the most popular of which was B Corp certification movement, which was a movement predicated on three things, right? It was performance, accountability, and transparency. So for Freeman, right, those three things matter. Those are the three most important things, right? Because it assured that business was not really just taking care of itself, right? On the other hand, there's the narrow view this time, where the question of ethics no longer mattered because business is essentially a game where the business people or the business players have to be engaged in a kind of cutthroat setup where the rule of the premise of the game is to get as much as possible revenues as they could, right? So there are many proponents. One of them is Adam Smith, right? I think you've heard of him in college. He had the idea of the invisible hand of the market in a free society. We'll get to that later. And then there's Milton Friedman, which we mentioned, and Albert Carr, who had the idea of business as a game. Okay, so let's make this fast, right? Broad view, right? I think this was supported by our other classmates. Any group or individual who can affect or is affected by the achievement of the organization's objectives. And so, stakeholder view, everybody is important. Right? So here, as you can see here, there's a pyramid. I don't want to explain this, right? Because other people are explaining it, right? But basically, it's like actualization on top, right? So the business is able to actualize itself as an entity that can actually help others, right? But Friedman didn't espouse that idea, right? He believed that all that the business has to do is to make money, right? And according to him, this is especially true with companies who have shareholders or stockholders for that matter. You can read that yourself, right? But another person who was famous for this was Albert Carr, who compared business to a poker game. Carr said that, like in a poker game, there are unethical things that could be done, such as bluffing, right? The same thing is true for business. It meant having to do things that might sometimes be unethical for the business. So another person who espoused this view of narrow CSR was Adam Smith, right? He argued that the nature of capitalist markets, which by the way is the kind of market that we have, is all about acting in terms of own self-interest. So you have everybody has a self-interest, but taken together, it creates the greater good overall, right? So this one for him was the idea of free society, right? We're free to decide what we want, and when we're deciding what we want and going for it, we make a collective effort towards something good, right? So here are some of the assumptions and assertions from Milton Friedman. Right, he said business should not merely be concerned with profits. No, sorry, he was against this idea that business should not merely be concerned with profits. They have social responsibilities and they should pursue desirable social ends. That's according to CSR. Businesses should have a social conscience and take all seriousness in things such as saving the environment, putting an end to discrimination, so on and so forth. Right? To this end, Friedman said, businessmen who talk this way are unwitting puppets of the intellectual forces that have been undermining the basis of a free society these past few decades. So ano ba yung basis of a free society according to Friedman? Well, for him, right, so long as everybody has a stake on the matter and they are not being taxed by any particular person, right, they can collectively we form a society where everybody can be successful. Right? So our society is a free enterprise, private property system, right? We buy things, we own things, where there are executives who run the company. So he said, even if the company is Eleemosynary, katulad ng schools, churches, right? Whenever there's an executive there, right, that executive or that boss is acting as an agent for the business, right? This means that if he does CSR, it has to be in such a way that he takes it outside of the company. Because if he's the one who decides, he or she, the executive, decides to do CSR, he's basically taxing all the shareholders and directing it to a cause that only him is the representative, right? Friedman was for this idea, right? Because at that time, 1960s, 70s, America was clamoring for taxation with representation, right? So, according to him, right, people can only do CSR outside of the company, right? Because there they become agents. There they become the principals. Right? They are the principal mover for the goodness of society. Inside the company, an executive will always have to be an agent. Right? So what does it mean to say that the corporate executive has a social responsibility in his capacity as a businessman? According to him, this statement is pure rhetoric. It must mean he is to act in some way that is not in the best interest of his employers. So if we were to be really strict about it. For example, that he is to refrain from increasing the price of the product in order to contribute to a social objective, such as probably being able to help people prevent inflation, pababaan nila yung prices ng commodities nila para makatulong sa society. Right? If you do things like that, right, you're actually doing a function of the government, right, not the business. Right? So as you can see here, in relation to communication studies, right, it's really so difficult to articulate CSR, right, according to Friedman, right, because if you do that, you're not really communicating the tenets of free society or a free market society. Right? Okay, so we keep in mind that stockholders of a business select the corporate executive, diba? So pinipili yun, ine-elect yun. And this suggests that the executives are serving the interest of the principal, which is again the boss, right, or the people who own the company, or the shareholders who own the company. But when the executive allows taxation to happen through a direct direction of proceeds towards a social purpose, he becomes in effect a public employee, a civil servant, even though he remains in name an employee of the private enterprise. Right? In an ideal free market resting on private property, no individual can coerce any other. All cooperation is voluntary. all parties to such cooperation benefit or they did not participate. These are not values, no social responsibilities in any sense other than the shared values and responsibilities of individuals. Society is a collection of individuals and of various groups they voluntarily form. That is free society. Right? And that is, for Friedman, the condition that is against a broad view of CSR. Then, according to Friedman, 1970, there's one and only one social responsibility of business, and that is to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase its profits, so long as it stays within the rules of the game, which is to say, engage in open and free market, right? Free competition. So I end my report with this, right? I hope you get a sense of the model here, right? Because this was really having to report this, you'll also be able to understand the broad view of CSR. That is all. Thank you.